Makes Me Wanna Holler by Nathan McCall, Chapter 28, Culture Shock. As I stood and walked across the newsroom, I felt them again. The eyes. Like radar, they locked onto me from the moment I rose from my seat and remained fixed as I headed slowly to the file cabinets where old newspaper clippings were kept. Returning to my desk, I looked straight ahead, pretending, as always, not to notice. They weren't the evil, predatory gazes that I saw in prison. They were polite stares by curious white reporters, editors, and secretaries in the small office of the Portsmouth Bureau where I worked. After a month as a reporter for my hometown paper, the Virginia Pilot Ledger Star, I began to get used to the stares. Well, I never really got used to them, but I resigned myself to the reality that someone always seemed to be watching and zeroing in on my every move. After all, I was a novelty, the only brother in the place. I started with the newspaper in 1981. When all my other job prospects fell through, I went back and asked for a job. Because of my prison record, a bunch of bigwigs in the paper met and debated the matter. In what one editor later described as a tough, close vote, they decided to hire me. Finally, I had my foot in the white man's door. Here was a chance to check out life across the tracks. It blew my mind. In 3 short years, I'd gone from one extreme to the other. From prison to a white-collar establishment job, something I had dared not hope for. I once resigned myself to the notion that if I ever did work for the white man, the best I could probably expect was a low-paying job as a delivery man. Now I had done much better. I was getting paid to write, to do something I actually enjoyed. Getting that job boosted my belief in myself and marked another major confirmation that there was merit to the values I had adopted in prison. It made me wonder, what else is possible? My parents were elated about the job. The phone lines burned from Portsmouth to New York to North Carolina as my mother spread the word among our relatives, and she boasted to local friends over the phone about her once wayward son. You know he works down at the newspaper now. For her and my stepfather, the newspaper job was a kind of joyful vindication for the hurt they suffered on my account all those years. They were also relieved. The job was an indication that I had weathered the critical transition from prison to the real world. With the stable gig, it was far less likely that I'd start hanging on the block again or backslide into crime. With my life stabilizing, my parents could focus on my brother Dwight, who was skidding fast on drug binges and long stretches of unemployment, which fed off each other magnificently to keep him down. By comparison, my other 3 brothers, Billy, Junie, and Brian, were doing well. They had jobs and stayed out of trouble, which was more than could be said for many we knew. It always made the older folks in Cavalier Manor feel good to be able to point to young people who were doing well. Whenever I ran into my parents' friends around town, they'd beam and say, "I read one of your stories in the paper the other day. Keep it up." Of course, they had only a vague notion about what I did at work. That didn't matter. The important thing was I had a professional job in an office with white people. Nobody was prouder than I was of what I had done. For the first time in my life, I had a real gig. It was more than just a job. It was the start of a career. I worked in the office at a desk. I interviewed people and wrote for a living. The first time I wrote a story as a full-fledged reporter, I stared at my byline a long time. There it was, just below the headline, Nathan McCall. It felt good seeing my name in the newspaper associated with something other than crime. It gave me a rush seeing that name on a document that was read by thousands of people. Sometimes, if I had a front page story in the paper, I'd stop by newsstands on the streets just to stare at my byline. I wonder how many people in the region would see that name. I toyed with the idea of adding my middle initial, J for Jerome, but that seemed too grand, so I nixed the thought. My new job paid enough for me to rent an apartment, my first one alone. Located less than a mile from the office, the one-bedroom unit had high ceilings and hardwood floors. It had a huge kitchen and a front porch with a swing and chairs. My mother eagerly donated pots, pans, linen, and dishes to help me get settled in. I bought a couch from McCall for $75 before he moved away. The place was sparsely furnished and crudely decorated, but it was mine. It was legit. When I put on clean clothes to go to work, it felt just like I'd always imagined, dignified. In celebration of my new status, I went out and brought a few snazzy neckties and sports coats to make sure I went to work every day, spit, shine, and clean. The most amazing thing was, for the first time in my life, I worked with white people who seemed civil. There was no oppressive supervisor. Reporters actually sat around, chatted, read the paper, and drank coffee before starting work. They took leisurely lunches, which they often wrote off on an expense account. That was a major leap from punching the clock. As I wrote in my journal, it was all so wonderfully strange. I have yet to grow accustomed to the free and easy nature of my job as a reporter. All my life, I've worked on jobs where white overseers stood close by and watched over my shoulders as I performed some menial, mindless task. They always were sure to make certain I never stole an extra minute or paused too long between strokes of the shovel. As a writer, I am now doing what I do best. It's difficult to believe. June 5th, 1981. All the benefits of the job made the white mainstream seem appealing in many respects, but it didn't come without a cost. Almost immediately after landing the job, I began to take on the subtle stresses brought on by the age-old burdens of race. There were a few other blacks in the main office in Norfolk, but I rarely saw them. As the only black in the downtown Portsmouth office, where we occupied the entire floor of a bank building, I could feel my blackness all the time. The differences between whites and me seemed magnified and discomforting. It was a serious culture shock. I sensed that many white reporters felt the same when they found themselves in comparable situations, caught in the midst of blacks on the building elevator, for instance. When they saw blacks staring, their faces turned red. They'd get that embarrassed, uptight look and stare nervously at their feet or gaze at the lighted elevator numbers until they reached their floor. They looked like they couldn't wait to get away and back into the company of their own kind. The eyes in my office gave me that same nervous feeling. Often, I looked up from my work to find one of my coworkers staring at me. Whenever my eyes caught theirs, they'd turn away. Their watching made me more self-conscious of the way I dressed, walked, and talked. I modified my pimp, which was already toned down, and I was so self-conscious when walking across the room that I stumbled sometimes from trying to be so careful. I wonder if they watched me so closely because I was black or because they knew about my prison record. Upper managers knew, but I wasn't sure whether gossip had filtered down to the rank and file. Paranoid about my past and afraid that other reporters might find out about it, I went to the newspaper's library files and searched for my name shortly after I started work. Certainly, there would be stories in there about a few of the run-ins I had with the law. I leafed through the files until I reached the M's. Sure enough, there it was, McCall, Nathan. There were 2 clips inside the small manila envelope. One clip was a brief story, dated May 22nd, 1974, about me shooting plaids at the carnival. The second clip, from early December 1974, was about the McDonald's robbery. It featured a photo of the getaway car and showed the gun on the floor. That life was so far from me now that it seemed I was reading about somebody else. I took the file to my desk They won't be needing this anymore. Later, I took it home. I felt scared and guilty about taking it, but I was more afraid of the prospect of white reporters passing crime stories about me around the newsroom. In the office, I could also hear myself when talking with whites. I never heard myself when around my own people, but every time I went around whites, the subtle, distinctive differences of tone and dialect in my speech and theirs stood out in my mind. They even used different words from those I use. They called people jerks and schmucks, and their language in general sounded corny to me, compared to the stylized, lyrical way that black folks talk. In a perfect world, such differences would be no big deal. But I remember what Naeem Akbar once said. Whites put a value on difference. To them, different is bad. Different is abnormal. Different is inferior. Being different is a professional liability. Every now and then, in a feeble attempt to ease the racial strain, I caught myself altering my dialect to downplay the speech differences when talking with whites. How you doing became, how are you today? The words felt awkward and phony rolling off my tongue. Whenever I chatted with the old black janitor who cleaned our offices most evenings, I automatically shifted back to my vernacular. Yo, what it is? I was always glad to see him and went out of my way to speak to him, as much to connect with another black person as to show him I hadn't forgotten who I was. He seemed to appreciate the gesture and always returned the greeting in kind. Hey, young man, how you today? The personal lives of my coworkers and me were very different too. My lifestyle was as routine as a shipyard whistle that sounded every day. I went to work, went home, spent time with a lady friend, and went to bed. Occasionally, my childhood friend Greg and I hooked up for a game of chess or went to a movie, but that was it. My white colleagues seemed to lead fuller, more active lives that included a broader range of fun and play. They had hobbies. They talked about camping, skiing, surfing, and hang gliding, stuff that I never would have thought to do. They went out to fancy restaurants all the time and talked in endless detail about the ambiance and the food they ate. Their obsession with good food and restaurants puzzled me. Compared to theirs, the existences of most black folks I knew seemed so contained. Most spent their working hours taking shit off the white man and devoted their free time to working off steam built up from taking shit off the white man. The old heads drowned their stress in liquor. The young bloods did drugs. The old shouted in church. The young hit the nightclubs. For us, it was all about damage control. It was obvious that many of my coworkers had little exposure to blacks. They seemed overpolite and unsure how to relate to me. Likewise, I was guarded with them, remembering lessons learned from others' pain. Keep them at arm's length and out of your personal business. There were always two conversations floating in my head when I interacted with whites. There was what I thought and what I said. Practically everything I said was calculated to counter some stereotype whites hold about blacks. If they brought up music, I responded in a way that said, yes, we listen to more than boogie woogie and the blues. Literature? Yes, I've read Hemingway, Fitzgerald, and all the other white motherfuckers you think are so good. They seldom knew what I really thought and felt about things, and I made sure they got few chances to find out. Often, when a group of them were headed out to lunch, they asked, "You want to join us, Nathan?" I'd lie, make up any excuse not to go. No thanks, I got some research to do. It was the same if they asked me to join them for drinks after work. No thanks, I'll have to pass. I got too much to do. I felt uneasy in social settings with whites. Barriers come down when scotch or bourbon takes center stage. People take liberties to pry and say things they might not ordinarily say in the sober setting of the workplace. No, they get no openings here. Several whites at the paper tried to reach out and make friends. One reporter in the office invited me to go camping with him, and another occasionally suggested we play chess after work. Then there was Ron Spear, the portly, gregarious editor who was responsible for me getting the job in the first place. He'd contacted me at Norfolk State and campaigned hard for me to get that first crucial internship. A man in his 40s who had covered the civil rights movement as a reporter, Ron was one of those rare bleeding hearts who had given a lot of thought to the damage his people have done to the lives and psyches of blacks. He was committed to doing his part to make things better. Almost a stereotype of the hard-driving, heavy-drinking newspaper man who kept a burning cigarette dangling from the tip of his lips, Ron wore frumpy shirts with the sleeves rolled up and his tie loosened at his fat neck. Whenever we talked, he'd crack jokes to try to get me to relax. He went out of his way to let me know that he was on my side. I guess that somehow he really understood the challenges I faced. Shortly after I was hired at the paper, Ron told me, "If you have any problems or need help with anything, just come to me." I sensed that Ron and the others were sincere, but still, I didn't open up to them. I couldn't. They were white, and I was convinced that the dumbest thing a black person can do was trust a white man. Ron and others got surface rap from me and nothing more. I saw them and everybody else at the paper as a hazard that came with the job. I figured I could tolerate them for a while. I had no intention of staying in the white mainstream forever. I figured I would stay for a time, learn all I could from the best white newspapers around, then take my skills back to my people. Ultimately, I figured I would work for a black publication or start one of my own. While working for white folks, I couldn't avoid them altogether. Their rules wouldn't allow that. One rule was that attendance was expected at work-related social functions. So when I heard about a planned company party to be held in Norfolk, I panicked. At first, when one of my colleagues asked if I was going, I told him, "I don't think I'll be able to make it." His eyes widened. "Oh no, if I were you, I wouldn't miss this party. It could affect your career." I felt cornered. In the weeks leading up to the affair, I agonized over the thought of being trapped in a social setting with a room full of white folks for 3 or 4 hours straight. I'd have gladly traded the torture for a night in jail. Then I manufactured a bright side to persuade myself that it would be all right. What the hell, I'll go. I haven't been to a party in a while. Maybe I can meet people and unwind a bit. It was nothing like any party I've ever been to. Constipated looking white folks dressed in sport coats and ties stood around chatting and smiling with drinks in their hands. They'd walk up to me, smile a phony smile and say, "So, what interesting stories are you working on? What do you think of President Reagan's Star Wars proposal?" I thought, this ain't no fucking party. This is work. The social ceremony that ensued was easy to learn. It was like musical chairs. You clustered in tight circles of people, chatted about current events, and listened to corny jokes. Then you moved on to other circles and chatted about current events and listened to more corny jokes. You smiled a lot, drank a lot, and pretended to be having fun. I felt more like an actor than a real person. Making my way through the maze of phoniness, I wondered, what would the fellas think if they could see me now? What would Frog, Bimbo, and Shane say if they walked through that door? For much of the evening, I waited for the music to start. Later, looking around the room, I realized there would be no music and no dancing. Black folks wouldn't even think of having a party without music. They would split in a heartbeat and talk about your ass on the way out. Standing there among those white folks made me realize that there were some aspects of hanging with the fellas that I really missed. In the old days when we partied together, we had a ball, and some of those parties were incredible. Folks showed up so intent on partying that they brought their own tambourines and shakers to jam with the beat. There would be sweat flying, bodies gyrating, and loud noise, accentuated by occasional chorus shouts of "party over here." The music, a constant rhythmic thump, would be pumping and everybody would be grooving in a rhythm that seemed ancient, timeless. It was at those times that it dawned on me that there was something special and thrilling about my people, our style, our manner and speech. Being among whites made me appreciate black folks that much more. With no music at the company party, the rest of the evening was an endurance test. I stood near the wall, holding the drink I no longer wanted, and cursing the clock that moved far too slow. When it seemed the appropriate time to slide, some white folks started shuffling toward the door. I shot out of there as fast as I could. Driving home, I thought about the torment I'd just been through and wondered again if this mainstream thing was meant for me. That was the first time I've ever gone to a party and left feeling more uptight than when I arrived. Okay, that brings us to the end of this chapter. And the main thought that I'm having now after reading this is that I don't mind standing out from white people. I know that we have differences. It's like a cultural and genetic thing. A lot of us are raised differently. We have different experiences, so we're going to behave differently. Differently. I think that's how you say that. Whatever. That idea of them having parties and there being no music, I've never experienced that myself, but my fiance has. Like, she's talked about that, going to a work event and it's supposed to be a party, but there's no music. There's just standing around. And I know that music resonates with us a little bit differently than it does anyone else on the planet. Hell, we were the first ones to come up with the idea of music on the planet. Like they say, the first drum was your mother's heartbeat. And from there, we made everything else. And I'm also thinking about Kendrick Lamar's song, They Not Like Us. And that's okay. We're different, they're different. They have their role to play, we have our own role to play. And I think it's the self-consciousness of some people that makes them feel bad when those differences are highlighted. You have your strengths and weaknesses, and I have my strengths and weaknesses. But I shouldn't let that, stop me from being myself. Now, there's only one you on the planet, so you need to find out who that person is and, highlight that. I think that's like a true superpower, being able to be yourself and be comfortable as yourself. And that's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. And that's okay. Now, I do think about like those people where they tell you, just be yourself. And, some people just have a shit personality. But I guess there's ways to fix that. You got to, expand your horizon. Read some books. Go experience some things. Hang out with some people. But anyway, you guys let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see y'all the next time in the next chapter. Peace.